The question is easily answered. You want to be on the rising star side, but how do you get there? How do you make sure that you are taking advantage of these disruptive times and using them in order to get innovation into your organization, into your marketplace, and drive success? This is the discussion that I want to have with you today. Now, many of my friends, when we talk about COVID and so on, they'll say, "Oh, I can't wait till we get back to normal again. When can we get back to normal?" And how I usually reply to them is, well, I've got bad news for you. We are not going to get back to the way things were. So when you ask when you're going to back to normal, the answer is never. Not the normal that you're used to. We're going to come to a new normal, right? And actually that new normal is going to be better. We have figured out how to become more productive using digital transformation in our workplace and lots of aspects of our lives. And we don't want to lose that innovation by going back to normal, because going back to normal is actually going backwards. Disruption is a time of pain, but when you emerge from that pain, we need to harness the innovation and make sure we stay in a better place. There's a great book written by a guy named Peter Hinson, who's kind of a futurist. And one of the things he talks about is that the new normal is never normal, right? And disruption is not an exception that's going to happen, just once in our lifetime. These disruptions are going to happen more and more often. In fact, even in our lifetimes, in the last 30 years, we've had at least 3 major disruptions, and even more depending on how you count, right? We had at the turn of the century the digital disruption. Right, the internet became a mainstream thing, and it changed, how we do business. And some businesses didn't survive. Right, travel agencies went out of business, and it changed how we do real estate business. It changed how we do retail business, and there was a huge change because of digital disruption. And for some businesses, it was very painful. Many businesses went out of business. But the businesses that emerged actually, created value and innovated, and those rising stars are now the big players that we know as Amazon and others that took advantage of the digital disruption to create a new way of doing things. So disruption is painful in some ways, especially if you're a business trying to fight your way through the disruption. But at the other side of it is a much brighter quality of business that you're going to be running in the environment. And then, after the digital disruption, we had financial disruption. That we got into a situation where banks had overextended themselves and created loans with high risk, and it created an implosion. And at the end of that, the banks that emerged were stronger. They had more robustness in how they managed risk. There was, better controls on from a regulatory point of view. But there are also banks that, went away, right? You had, Lehman Brothers and Merrill Lynch, and a lot of these players. They, either went away or got acquired by other banks that were in a stronger position. So this financial disruption was painful for some, but those that emerged hopefully stronger than when they went into the disruption. Now we're in the middle of biological disruption. And, we could say that digital disruption started 20 years ago, but COVID as a biological disruption actually motivated, huge acceleration of digital transformation. In Silicon Valley, where I'm from, we have this joke of, who led the digital transformation at your company? One choice is the CEO. Nope, that's not the answer. Another choice is the chief technology answer. Still not the correct answer. COVID-19 for most companies is really what forced the digital disruption to be widely adopted, the transformation across the whole organization. And I say organization because the way that we work changed dramatically. And we figured out that actually, many people could be even more productive at home than they were going into the office, because they didn't have long commutes, and they had better quality working environments at home. And the way that we lived our lives, shopping and socializing, teaching, worshiping, all aspects of life were changed through this digital disruption stress test that was introduced by COVID-19. Because, almost on an overnight basis, digital was the only way that you could do things because, everybody was locked down. You couldn't leave your house except to, do short shopping trips and so on. And that was only for essentials that you couldn't order online. Everything that we did changed into a digital format, and that created a lot of improvement in how digital was executed in all aspects of our lives. And when we come out the other end of the COVID-19 biological disruption, we're going to be a stronger society as a result of that. When you think disruption, what is the impact of a disruption? Well, we immediately go into crisis management mode. We start to get all of our smart people in a room, and we figure out how to pool our assets and our dollars and figure out how we're going to reallocate resources and solve the problem. And you get massive innovation. And this is a good thing. And we want to take advantage of that massive innovation and sustain it once the disruption is over. And, some people say, well, actually, we wouldn't have all this crisis management if we had just made a plan. You make a plan, and then when that event happened, then you know how to execute on the plan. But this assumes that, your plan knows what's going to happen before it happens. And, it's very difficult to plan for something that you don't know is going to happen. And, we can look at the data and say the past is the best predictor of the future, except when it's not, except when something, brand new happens that we didn't expect. And you can say, well, okay, COVID-19, we had something like this about 100 years ago with Spanish flu. There were many similarities, but of course, society was completely different then. The rate of spread was very different because the world was less mobile. But also, here in 2020, 2021, we have access to all kinds of digital technologies that didn't exist 100 years ago. And, therefore, the past is really not a good predictor of the future. And the reality is that, these things that are unpredictable, they can't be predicted. That's why we call them unpredictable. And, we can always look in retrospect, oh, yeah, of course, we were going to have a biological disruption. We could see it coming. We had SARS, we had MERS, we had Ebola. It was only a matter of time before we had a global pandemic like the one we're in now. You can always explain things in retrospect. But by the time you do that, it's too late, right? The thing is already unfolded. You already had to deal with all the problems and so on. It is unreasonable to expect that you can make a plan for all potential scenarios that might happen, because many of the ones that are most disruptive are largely unpredictable, except with retrospect. So what's a better way to do things? You figure out how to survive in the never normal world. You don't try to predict what's going to happen, but rather you become an agile organization that knows how to move fast and adapt when unexpected things do happen. You embrace the change, and the most effective way to innovate is you learn how to collaborate both within your organization as well as across organization. I think one of the most amazing things that happened during COVID was the level of collaboration and cooperation across organizations who many times in the past weren't even talking to each other. I'm talking about government organizations, academic organizations, commercial organizations, nonprofit organizations. They all got together because there was a common cause, the better good, that they all wanted to help, alleviate this pain caused by the global pandemic. Even organizations who normally would compete with each other were focused more on collaborating for the global good than fighting for with each other over a penny of profit. And this was very encouraging to see that level of commitment to positive outcomes in this crisis scenario. Now, if you're going to survive in the never normal world, you have to be able to adapt to change. This is, the definition put forth by Stephen Hawking of intelligence, the ability to adapt to change. This is what distinguishes our species, humans, from all other living things, is our ability to adapt to change. But we can talk about adaptive change, but not all organizations are equally able to adapt to change. I think it's worth talking a little bit about what are the characteristics of organizations that are, I'll call them intelligent organizations, the organizations that are going to be most likely to emerge as those rising stars in the face of big disruption. Now, the fundamental capability that you need, and of course I'm very biased on this topic for those who know me well, right, is the ability to use the data to adapt to change, right? The data gives you insights to what actions you can take, what interventions you can take, how to redesign your supply chain, how to redesign your customer interfaces, how to redesign your manufacturing processes in order to adapt to the disruption at hand. Use the data, use it in an intelligent way. And when I talk about use the data, this disruptive scenario is going to put a lot of stress on getting the data as quickly as possible, right? We want to use the data, but we don't want to have last month's data or last year's data because the disruption hadn't happened yet. And we don't really get a lot of value out of last year's data because during the disruption, everything's changed. So we don't get the full value unless that data is very, very up to date. So you want rapid learning with data in near real time. And the best way to learn rapidly is with advanced machine learning algorithms. Humans cannot learn as quickly as the machine learning algorithms if we give them the training data. The data is the fuel for the learning. And it's not just any data. If you have summary data and reports, this is actually not very useful. We need detailed data. We need to be able to get to the, not just the detail, but the subatomic detail, to see the detail, how the processes are executing, not just that, a transaction happened, but all the interactions below the level of transactions to understand how to redesign the processes in order to be effective in the new normal world. And data is the key to this. Here's an example from Singapore, where very early in the coronavirus, they deployed an application that was able to track the disease and use data to understand, where are the sources of infection coming from, and how can we track down those sources, and then how can we isolate them, quarantine, and fight the disease in a more effective way using data. And this is in real time, tracking using GPS data and using the network topology of all the mobile phone carriers, and then looking at people's journey through the city and where the infections were taking place, etc. This is an example of using digital to innovate and fight this disruption. And in Pakistan, there's actually a history of doing this long before COVID. In the Punjab region, the use of digital technology to fight dengue fever was a huge success. Right, this is a disease that killed many people, especially elder people and young children, that they were most at risk. And these digital technologies were used to track the source of the disease to the mosquito breeding grounds, and then to eradicate those breeding grounds from a variety of means, and to significantly reduce the number of fatalities related to dengue fever. And this was a cooperative effort between the government of Punjab, the academic universities, and the commercial sector to enable this capability through applications built on mobile devices. Highly successful. And then that technology got, I'll call it, exported and adopted in Malaysia. And in Malaysia, they extended even further. And so this is something that we know how to do in Pakistan. There's a track record of innovation, of using data in near real time, and a track record of using GPS and being smart about dealing with disruption long before COVID. So there's a track record of doing this. Monitoring the persons most likely to carry the disease then allows you to, quarantine and restrict access for those dangerous persons so they can't affect other people. But we have to be very conscious that this can also introduce different kinds of biases, right? We need to understand that people's location data and their healthcare data, this is very private data. We need to protect that data. That's not public data. We need to make sure that there's not biases in the machine learning that is unfairly discriminating against certain communities of people, inadvertently, that we're, isolating people that shouldn't be isolated and so on. We need to pay attention. There are responsibilities that we as practitioners need to take on if we're going to use the technology in this way, right? So there's great power, and with that great power also comes great responsibility to protect the data and use it in a way that does not introduce unfair bias into society or unfair exposure to private data, whether that's location data or healthcare data or any other kinds of private data. I want you to think about your organization, and are you designed and fit to adapt to change? So the question is, are you a brittle organization or are you a resilient organization? And I'm going to suggest, not surprisingly, that resilient is what you need to be in an environment which is full of disruptions, where you can't predict what's going to happen next. Brittle organizations tend to be top-down command and control organizations, very hierarchical, highly optimized. They're very efficient. The problem with that efficiency is that it's very fragile. That if you've got a highly optimized supply chain and then something in the supply chain breaks way upstream, then the whole supply chain falls apart. That's brittle. That's a problem, right? Brittle organizations are designed to avoid failure. They try to anticipate what the failure points are. They build redundancies around those. The problem is when you have an unpredictable, extreme disruption, the brittle organizations tend to suffer a lot more than the resilient organizations, because brittle organizations are so highly optimized that they're fragile. There's not a lot of buffer in order to adapt to change, and that leads to, in the end, a less intelligent, less adaptive organization. I would suggest we would rather be a resilient organization, an organization which has a self-organizing structure, has a lot of ad hoc communication, and organically realigns itself around the problems that need to be solved. So they're highly adaptive, and they're designed to learn from failure. So brittle organizations are designed to avoid failure. Resilient organizations embrace failure, and they learn from these failures. And it's okay to fail, but we take learning as an opportunity to improve to a better place than where we were when we started. These resilient organizations are an absolute requirement for coming out as a rising star from these highly disruptive situations. And to me, this ability to embrace and even celebrate failure is so critical. Again, the brittle organizations try to avoid it, and I'm saying don't avoid it. Look at failure as an opportunity for learning. Thomas Edison is one of the most famous inventors in the US. He invented the light bulb, he invented the phonograph, he invented many, many other things. And his inventions are quite well publicized. What's not well publicized is he had a lot more failures than successes. One of his quotes that I like to repeat is, "I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Those 10,000 ways that didn't work are each of them learning opportunities, because the 10,001st attempt at solving the problem, that's the one that worked. That's the one that got the pot of gold. That's the one that made him famous. And then people forget the 10,000 ways that didn't work. As long as you're fast and as long as you're efficient. So failure should be fast and cheap. You should learn. You should not make the same failure twice, because it means you're not learning very well, right? But learning is a way of embracing the failure and improving yourself as a result of the failure. So failure is not really failure, it's learning. And organizations that aren't willing to fail, that don't celebrate failure as an opportunity to learn, They're just doing incremental improvement. They're not really doing true breakthrough innovation. You can't get breakthrough innovation if you're not willing to fail and learn from those failures. Now, when you are innovating, I would suggest that it is much better to work in teams than as individual contributors. When I'm going out and hiring someone on my team, of course I want smart people who have high skills and they can do the work and they're hard workers and all those things. But one of the most important things I look for is, are they a collaborator? I do not want to hire someone that is sitting in an office and you put pizza under the door and these amazing mathematical algorithms come out if they can't communicate with others and they don't work in teams, because teams produce better results. If you look at the first half of the 20th century, pretty much all Nobel Prizes were won by individuals. By the second half of the 20th century and into the 21st century where we are now, most Nobel Prizes were granted to teams of people, not individual. With teams of people, you get better innovation. And on those teams, I want a lot of diversity. I want males and I want females. I want older people. I want younger people. I want different ethnicities, different religions, different universities. That diversity creates different perspectives. It can sometimes create friction, but friction is actually a source of innovation when it's done, handled in a constructive way. So diverse teams are incredibly important for innovating in an efficient and creative way. Embracing failures means that we're also going to embrace chaos, right? When everything is running exactly as you expected, everything happens, just as you had planned, there's not a lot of opportunity for innovation in that, because you're just plodding along and doing what needs to be done. When you embrace chaos, that means that you're recognizing the world is random, right? That unexpected things happen. Entropy is reality. And coming out the other side of that, you want things to be organized in a better way. Again, you want to be one of the rising stars, not one of those sinking ships. And there are quite a few sinking ships that didn't embrace chaos. There are some businesses that when the chaos of COVID hit, they said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to cut costs. We're going to batten down, and in 6 weeks, COVID is going to be done, and then we'll merge, and it'll be back to normal, and we can be successful again, just like we were before COVID. This is a horrible strategy because, of course, COVID wasn't done in 6 weeks. They didn't embrace the chaos. They tried to ignore it. They were like the ostrich that I showed on the previous slide. They put their head in the ground and tried to ignore all the chaos around them and hope that when they pulled their head back out, everything would be back to normal. Well, the reality is that normal is never coming back. So embrace the chaos, figure out what the chaos means and how you want to sort of navigate through the disruption and come out stronger. Just trying to, bite the bullet and, brute force your way through the disruption. This is not usually the best way to do it, because you're actually specifically trying to hold on to the past and not change and fight your way through the disruptive in the hopes that you'll emerge on the other side. But you don't know how long it's going to last, and you don't know what the world is going to look like on the other side of the disruption. This is a CXO conference, so there are many CXOs in the audience. I want to propose that one of the most important CXO is the CDO. And by that, I don't mean the Chief Data Officer, although that's also a very important CXO. I'm talking about the Chief Destruction Officer. The reality is, in order to make something better, you sometimes have to burn down the house. So the picture that you're seeing here is an effigy that is burned at the end of one of the most innovative gathering of humans that I attend on an annual basis. Not in the last 2 years of COVID, but this Burning Man festival that attracts people from all over the world, from Pakistan, from China, from India, from Japan, from Russia, from the US, from everywhere in the world, from Latin America, Africa. People are coming, and the exchange of ideas is incredible, and the openness and the diversity is incredible. And at the end of this 1 week, they take this effigy and they burn it down to the ground. And this is symbolic that next year we are not going to be constrained by the past. We're going to rebuild this piece of art, and we're going to rebuild it from scratch. And it's going to be better than the year before because we will have learned how to make things better. And we're going to learn how to innovate even further. And so burning down the house removes the constraints of the box that you're living in. And this is very important if you want to create something much better in its place, not just incrementally better, but much better. And having the openness to change direction, to get out of the box, is very important. So this quote by Lao Tzu, a Taoist master, is something that I think is very powerful. If you do not change direction, you may end up where you're headed. And we're headed in some pretty bad places in certain situations, right? The direction that we're taking, if we don't change that direction, we're going to get into a ditch. There are disruptions that we can predict are going to happen in the near future. We can see that geopolitical disruption is going to happen, right? We've been living in a world of globalization and collaboration across the different countries and continents and so on, and now you can see some of the scale tilting to nationalism, and sometimes disruptions like COVID actually reinforce these nationalist feelings, and it becomes even worse. And so, there's some level of national pride and so on that is of course good, but you don't want nationalism turning into isolationism and aggression at borders and so on. So this geopolitical disruption, we have to be very careful that this doesn't disrupt our lives in a way that is not positive for society. The other area that I want to call attention to in this discussion is ecological disruption. We are causing a lot of pain on this earth that we're living in, right? The ecological disruption is a huge problem, right? We're spewing CO2 in the atmosphere. The pollution is creating a global climate change that is creating tsunamis and huge heat waves and all kinds of problems, and it's only going to get worse. We're already seeing it in many geographies. The weather extremes are becoming more and more in California, where I'm from. The heat and the fires that are engulfing the state during certain times of year, in parts of Asia, the tsunamis and the flooding and so on. It's a huge problem, and if we don't change the path that we're on, it's going to get worse. And many of the sea levels in this audience, you have the opportunity to make a measurable change, right? With data, with machine learning algorithms, we can change the way that we do business so that we're not just optimizing for profit, we're also optimizing for ecological sustainability. So we can combine economic viability and ecological sustainability and find the intersection points where we can be both profitable and sustainable. This is a much more powerful business model than either one of those in isolation. I don't want you to just become ecologically sustainable without paying attention to profit, because if you go out of business, all those ecologically good things you were doing, they will all go out the window. But I also don't want you to focus only on profits. Right? We need to have ethics in the way that we do business, and we need to find that intersection between ecological sustainability and economic viability. Now, if we want to make big changes, as I've said before, you don't just make changes incrementally. One of the best practices is zero-based transformation. Don't think about where you are and how to make incremental changes. Forget about where you are. Think about where you want to be. And once you have this vision of where you want to be with the end in mind, then you can work backwards. Think about how you work backwards from where you want to be to meet up from where you are. And the reality is you can do both. You can do forward chaining and backward chaining, and then you can make them meet in the middle. But too often, we're trying to make incremental changes from where we are without sort of thinking about what that big vision is of where we want to get to. And without a big vision, you're not going to get the kind of digital transformation that you really want in your organizations. When you're following that path to digital transformation, I'm going to suggest that it's important to follow the tangents. In other words, break the rules. Don't just get a rule book from some consultant and follow, step 1, step 2, step 3, and so on. You need to adapt the transformation to your environment. How you do digital transformation in the Pakistani environment, in the financial services industry, is going to be different than how you do digital transformation in the telecommunications industry in the United States, right? There are differences, and you need to understand your environment. And in order to do that, you have to get lost in it. And so I love to travel. I've traveled all over Pakistan in the northern area and to the different archaeological sites, one of which you see behind me in the screen. And I love getting lost, right? That sounds a little bit strange, but it's okay. I've never been permanently lost. I love to go into the small streets in Lahore and just follow the streets wherever they lead you, and you can discover amazing things. And it's a much different experience than the people that have their Lonely Planet guidebooks, and they're walking down the street and they turn left here and they turn right here and so on. They don't discover anything new. They're just following a rule book. And if you really want to innovate, you got to throw out the rule book sometimes, and you got to reinvent. And getting lost in your environment and following the tangents and exploring, this is part of digital transformation that I think is very, very powerful. Now, when you are going down the path of digital transformation, it's important that you look for best practices across all industries, not just in your own industry. So there is a bank that I worked with in Singapore, and they were going through a digital transformation project, and the team presented this project plan to the CEO. And one of the first steps in their digital transformation was to do benchmarking within their industries and look at the most innovative banks and what the digital practices were that they were engaged in, and understand those best practices as a benchmark for what this bank would do. And the CEO said, "No, I reject this plan." You know what? I completely agree with the CEO. What we went on to discuss is that, if you compare yourselves to the best banks in the world and benchmark yourselves against those banks, and you replicate all those best practices, you are the queen of the pigs. Because banking is not known for innovation and digital transformation. Why would you compare yourself to best practices within an industry which itself is not best practices across all industries? So the CEO said, "No, I want you to benchmark against the the Amazons and the Apples and the Googles and the Facebooks and so on, the Alibabas. You need to benchmark across best practices across all industries." And if you're a bank, your future competitors are not your peers in the banking industry. I mean, of course they are to some extent, but your biggest existential threat are the digital giants. Alibaba has a banking license. Facebook has a banking license. Apple has a banking license. And these banking licenses will translate into future competition. As open banking initiative happens, and those APIs get published, and these digital giants are able to tap into the financial infrastructure, it's going to be game changing. And these organizations are very good at using data. They are very good at using data to understand behaviors and product preferences, and they will understand how to use this data to predict risk. And if you're a traditional bank and you're comparing yourself to other traditional banks, and you're not thinking about how do you be as good as the digital giants and using data, you are going to be one of the sinking ships, not one of the rising stars. So it's important that you look at best practices in all industries. And I'm using banking as an example, but we can also use as an example, let's say, automotive manufacturing and healthcare. Think, well, how are those similar? Well, in automotive manufacturing, we have some best practices around condition-based maintenance, where in the old days of automotive manufacturing, when you drive your car, for let's say 50,000 kilometers, you should bring it in for a checkup. And then we tighten some bolts and we check on things and so on. Then you can drive it for another 50,000 kilometers before you do your next checkup. This is called milestone-based maintenance. And the problem with milestone-based maintenance is you're either doing maintenance too often or not often enough. Most likely you're doing it too often because the people that set the milestones are very conservative and they don't want the car to break down on you on the highway. So they do over maintenance, and it probably costs you between 30 and 40% more money than necessary when you do milestone-based maintenance. And by the way, and sometimes you should do the maintenance not to the next milestone, but sooner because something is going wrong with the car. With condition-based maintenance, monitoring the detailed data collected from sensors, we can understand exactly when to do maintenance on the car. So that is as low cost as possible, but also you will actually do maintenance before something breaks in a much more effective, proactive way than the milestone-based approach. Now, from a healthcare point of view, most people, they do their annual physicals with the doctor. That's milestone-based maintenance, right? Imagine that you have wearable sensors, or let's say you're diabetic and you do your blood sugar level testing every day. You have wearable sensors for your blood pressure and cholesterol and blood sugar level and so on. And we're collecting all that data. We can, in continuous near real-time basis, we can do condition-based maintenance and understand, what intervention needs to happen so that you don't end up in the emergency room, or you don't come to the doctor too often, you don't come and you don't come too infrequently. So those best practices in automotive manufacturing, we can extrapolate those into healthcare and become much, much more efficient. So there are many examples where you can get good ideas by crossing industry boundaries. Think about all these different ways that you can innovate. But most of all, use the disruption as a jumping off point to drive innovation. So this is a quote that's attributed to Winston Churchill. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Now, the reality is he probably never said this, but it's a great quote. I love the message around, don't look at these disruptions as really crises, right? These are opportunities to innovate, and at the other end of the disruption, you come out stronger and better. You want to be one of those rising stars that emerge from the disruption. With that, I want to thank you for spending this time with me. I want to thank Analytics and Teradata and the Global CXO Forum for sponsoring this keynote, and I hope you have a great conference. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you in person in 2022 in Pakistan.